And just take a look at this dog and think about what you think his behavioral health is. All right, so I'll tell you that that dog was doing that behavior for hours and hours. There was nothing happening in the kennel next to him. He would just jump up and down and run in that repetitive circle over and over and over all day long. So hopefully that you'll recognize that that's not a behaviorally healthy animal. And so he may have perfect blood work, he may have a perfect physical examination, but something is out of balance. Even if all his medical health parameters are perfect, that's not a healthy animal because we've not met his behavioral health needs. And so I like this quote here by Melissa Kaplan. So I'll just read that to you. It says, knowing how to care for an animal in captivity is more than just learning about the basics, such as temperature requirements, the right substrate to use, what type of food they eat, and how to offer water. To really care for any animal in captivity, we need to know about how that species lives in the wild, how they make use of their environment, and the signs that indicate when we are doing it wrong. So I point that out because frequently those signs that indicate we're doing it wrong come in the form of behavior problems. So we have to approach behavioral health the same way that we approach medical health, and that starts at intake. So just like we do a physical examination, we'll have to do a behavioral examination. Just like we do intake treatments to prevent problems, we have to do stress reduction and environmental enrichment to prevent problems down the road. And just like we do diagnostic testing for specific diseases, we have to do behavioral evaluation and modification to prevent specific problems. And not that we're going to do all those things at intake, but intake is the first step in identifying those problems and creating the plan for the next steps. So again, just as with medical health care, behavioral care starts with obtaining a history, because how can we meet the needs of an individual animal if we don't know what they are? And so again, ideally, you're going to try to collect that information verbally, but written works as well too. There are some really nice sample behavioral information collection form that we've put in the reference section for you to take a look at. But you want to find out, what's the lifestyle of this animal? Are they used to living indoors? Are they used to living outdoors? Are they used to being around adults or children? What are they going to do when you scratch their ears or touch their feet? Are there any specific behavior problems that we need to know about if we're going to take care of this animal in the shelter? And then it's always good to ask about any tricks and talents that they might have, because that can go a long way to helping them get adopted and really promoting them while they're in the facility. So we'll talk just for a minute about stress reduction, and many of the behavior concerns that we see in shelters arise out of stress. So that's why I want to touch on this. And when I say stress, I'm talking about the abnormal or bad kind of stress. And so I'm using the definition that you see here, which is an abnormal or extreme adjustment in physiology and or behavior in response to an aversive stimuli. And you'll notice that the word physiology was in there. So there's actual physical changes that happen in animals when they're stressed. It's not just, oh, well, he feels bad. There's actual physical changes happening. So when you're talking about short-term stress, that causes the body to release epinephrine, or what's called adrenaline. And that can result in increased heart rate, increased respiratory rate, sweating, all the things that you see listed on the left there. Really particularly important for us in the shelter is a depressed immune system. So we talked earlier about how important it was to have a strong immune system to fight off the diseases that an animal might be exposed to in a shelter. And so that should be a huge concern to us if we're going to depress their immune system just because of stress. And similar things happen because of long-term stress. So long-term stress, you get cortisol release, and various other physical changes happen. So an animal becomes dehydrated. Again, we have a depressed immune system. They might shed viral diseases. They might develop ulcers. They might develop insulin resistance. So if we're trying to ensure good health and welfare in the shelter, we must include some provisions for identifying and responding to stress. Again, this starts at intake with the way that we handle animals, the variety of stressors that we choose to expose them to during the intake process. And what is stressful to any individual animal is a combination of things. So it's a combination of genetics and what they're born with, and a combination of their experiences and the environment that they've been exposed to. It's the same nature versus nurture argument that we hear about all the time. And we know that the shelter environment is inherently stressful, so we must take every precaution we can not to make it any worse. And so you'll see in the boxes in the center a couple things that make stress better or worse. So the severity of a certain stimulus can dictate how stressful it is, whether it's something brand new to the animal or something they've seen before, whether it's predictable stress, do they know what's going to happen next, and the duration, how long is that stressor going to last, can really make a difference as well. And so environmental enrichment is actually the tool that we can use in the shelter to help reduce stress. And so here's another quote from the guidelines. Enrichment should be given the same significance as other components of animal care and should not be considered optional. And so you have some examples of ways you might enrich the environment of animals in your shelter care in the pictures here. There's also a couple handouts on the UF website about simple shelter enrichment ideas that you can use. So again, you're going to identify animals' needs when they come in at intake. You're going to identify those stressed animals, and you'll be able to set them up for success by enriching their environments in particular ways that are good for them. So the last thing regarding behavioral health care that I want to touch on is behavioral evaluation and modification. So in my opinion, intake is not the appropriate time for a formal behavior evaluation or what people refer to as a temperament test. I like to think of a behavioral evaluation as a combination of many things that happen throughout an animal's stay. So I've listed a few of those things here. But you'll notice right at the top of the list, observations at intake are a key component of this. And they really help you identify the needs an animal will have during its shelter stay. And so you can use that in combination with all the other things you see here to really get a good behavioral evaluation, a really comprehensive idea of what's going on with that animal and what its needs are. And for more information on that, there's a bunch of resources listed here for you that have really good information. So the Animal Sheltering Magazine has really nice articles about behavioral health care in the shelter. If you're not a subscriber to that, I encourage you to take a look at it. You can view old issues online for free. The Center for Shelter Dogs has a great website with lots of good in-shelter training techniques and extensive information about performing a formal behavior evaluation or temperament test. Open Paw and the Train to Adopt websites both have lots of really good practical in-shelter techniques and tricks that you can use to help enrich an animal's environments and train them using positive methods. Of course, there's the Guidelines for Standards of Care, and then I mentioned some of the resources on our website at UF.